The sound of my own laughter still echoes in my nightmares. What started as harmless teasing at a dinner party became the evidence that destroyed my marriage, took my daughter, and left me legally silenced. My husband never raised his voice, never threw a plate, never stormed out. He just quietly collected every cruel word I said about his looks and turned them into court documents. The worst part? I handed him every piece of evidence myself. Oh, come on, Miles looks like he got his face caught in a blender. Lena's voice carried across the restaurant as she gestured wildly with her wine glass. The table erupted in laughter, and I found myself giggling along, caught up in the moment. Miles sat beside me, his fork frozen halfway to his mouth. His jaw tightened almost imperceptibly, but he said nothing. He never said anything when the joke started. "Aurelia, you're so mean," laughed Sarah, one of my coworkers. "But seriously, how do you wake up next to that every morning?" The wine had made me bold, reckless. "I just keep the lights off," I quipped, and the table roared with approval. Jonah, our project manager, was practically doubled over with laughter. "Stop it, you're killing me," he wheezed, wiping tears from his eyes. Poor Miles, sitting right there taking it like a champ. I glanced at my husband. His face had gone completely blank, that neutral expression he wore when he was processing something complex at work. But this wasn't work. This was supposed to be fun. "It's just jokes, honey," I said, reaching over to squeeze his arm. "You know we love you." Miles looked at me for a long moment, then nodded slowly. "Of course," he said quietly. "Just jokes." The conversation moved on to other topics, but I noticed Miles barely spoke for the rest of the evening. When we got home, he went straight to his office and closed the door. I could hear him typing on his keyboard late into the night. "Daddy's working again," 7-year-old Ivy complained the next morning at breakfast. "Daddy's always working," I muttered, buttering her toast. "Some people are just too sensitive to have fun." Ivy tilted her head, considering this. "Is Daddy sensitive because his face looks funny?" My stomach dropped. "What did you say, sweetheart?" "You said his face looks like it got caught in a blender. Does that make him sad?" I knelt down to her level, my heart racing. "Ivy, that was just grown-up teasing. We don't say things like that, okay? It might hurt people's feelings." She nodded solemnly, but I could see the confusion in her eyes. How do you explain to a child that sometimes adults say cruel things and call it humor? Miles appeared in the doorway, fully dressed for work. He'd heard everything. Our eyes met across the kitchen, and for the first time in our 8-year marriage, I saw something cold and calculating in his gaze. "Have a good day at school, Ivy," he said, kissing the top of her head. To me, he simply nodded. "Aurelia." That was it. No kiss goodbye, no "have a good day." Just my name, spoken like he was filing it away somewhere. At work, I tried to shake off the uncomfortable feeling from the morning. The group chat was buzzing with messages about the previous night's dinner. Lena: "OMG, I'm still laughing about the blender comment." Sarah: "Aurelia, you're savage." Jonah: "Poor Miles, but honestly, how does he even get dates? Oh, wait, he doesn't anymore." I found myself screenshotting the conversation, laughing despite myself. It felt good to be the center of attention, to be seen as witty and sharp. Miles was always so serious, so focused on his work and his routines. When was the last time he'd made me laugh the way Jonah did? The messages continued throughout the day. Jonah: "Seriously though, what do you see in him? You're way out of his league." Me: "He's stable, good with Ivy, but yeah, not exactly eye candy." Lena: "Girl, life is short. You deserve someone who matches your energy." Sarah: "And your looks. You're gorgeous, Aurelia." The validation felt intoxicating. At home, Miles was quiet and distant, buried in his laptop or playing with Ivy. But here, in this chat, I was appreciated, desired even. That evening, Miles made dinner while I helped Ivy with homework. It was a normal domestic scene, but something felt different. Miles moved around the kitchen with mechanical precision, like he was following a checklist. When I tried to make conversation about my day, he responded with single-word answers. "How was work?" I asked. "Fine." "The Peterson project going well?" "Yes." "Miles, are you upset about last night? Because it really was just jokes," he finished, not looking up from the stove. "I know," but his tone suggested he knew something else entirely. After dinner, I noticed him taking photos of the kitchen, the living room, even our bedroom. When I asked why, he said he was documenting some insurance claims. It seemed odd, but Miles was always meticulous about paperwork. Later that night, as I was getting ready for bed, I heard Ivy playing with her dolls in her room. "You're ugly," she was saying in a high-pitched voice. "Your face looks funny. Nobody wants to look at you." I froze, my toothbrush halfway to my mouth. Through the bathroom mirror, I could see Miles standing in the hallway listening. He pulled out his phone and started recording. "Miles, what are you doing?" He stopped the recording and looked at me with that same calculating expression. "Documenting," he said simply. "Documenting what?" "The impact." A chill ran down my spine. "Impact of what?" But he was already walking away, heading to his office with his phone in hand. I heard the sound of his printer starting up, then the soft click of his filing cabinet opening and closing. That night, I lay awake staring at the ceiling while Miles slept soundly beside me, or pretended to sleep. In the darkness, I couldn't shake the feeling that something fundamental had shifted in our marriage. The jokes that had seemed so harmless, so natural in the moment, now felt heavy and sharp. I reached for my phone and scrolled through the group chat messages from earlier. In the cold light of the screen, they looked different, meaner, more deliberate, but it was too late to take them back now. The next few weeks passed in a strange, tense quiet. Miles continued his normal routines, work, dinner, bedtime stories for Ivy, but it felt like he was performing these actions rather than living them. He was polite, efficient, and completely unreachable. The group chat, however, had become my lifeline. Jonah had started messaging me privately, and the attention was intoxicating. "Jonah, lunch today? I have some ideas for the Morrison presentation." Me, "Sure. 12:30? Jonah, "Perfect. Looking forward to seeing you." The lunch was supposed to be about work, but it quickly turned personal. Jonah was charming, attentive, everything Miles wasn't. He listened when I complained about my husband's emotional distance, nodded sympathetically when I described how boring our marriage had become. "You deserve better," he said, reaching across the table to touch my hand. "Someone who appreciates how amazing you are." I didn't pull my hand away. Back at home, Miles had installed a new security system. "For safety," he explained when I asked about the cameras now positioned around our apartment. "You can never be too careful." He'd also changed all the passwords on our shared devices and locked his desk drawer with a small padlock. When I questioned this, he simply said he was being more careful about identity theft. "Since when do you care about identity theft?" I pressed. "Since I realized how easily people can be betrayed by those closest to them," he replied, not looking up from his laptop. The comment felt pointed, but I couldn't prove anything. Miles was too smart to make accusations he couldn't support. The group chat continued to be my escape. Lena, "How's married life treating you?" Me, "Like being married to a robot. He barely talks to me anymore." Sarah, "Maybe he's finally realizing he's punching above his weight." Jonah, "His loss is someone else's gain." Me, "Don't tempt me." I screenshotted these conversations obsessively, sharing them with my mom and Lena during our weekly coffee dates. They were evidence of my wit, my desirability, my right to be appreciated. "Honey, maybe you should talk to Miles," my mother suggested during one of these sessions. "Marriage counseling or something." "Why should I have to fix his insecurity?" I snapped. "I'm not responsible for his feelings about a few harmless jokes." But even as I said it, I remembered Ivy's doll game and felt a stab of guilt. That guilt intensified when I got a call from Ivy's school counselor, Ms. Grant. "Mrs. Vane, I wanted to discuss some concerning language Ivy used in class today. She told another student that they were ugly like Daddy and that nobody wants to look at ugly people. When I asked her where she learned this, she said it was something the grown-ups said at home." My face burned with shame. "Ms. Grant, I can explain." "I'm sure you can, but right now I'm more concerned about Ivy. Children often repeat what they hear at home, especially when it involves family dynamics. I'm going to document this conversation and recommend some resources for age-appropriate discussions about kindness and respect." The word document sent a chill through me. Is that really necessary? It was just a misunderstanding. "Mrs. Vane, when a child uses language that suggests they're learning to devalue people based on appearance, especially family members, we take that seriously. I'll be sending a summary of our conversation to both you and Mr. Vane." That evening, Miles was waiting for me when I got home from work. He had a printed email in his hand, Ms. Grant's summary. "We need to talk," he said calmly. "Miles, I can explain." "I'm sure you can. But first, I think we need professional help. I've made an appointment with Dr. Rebecca Martinez, a family therapist, tomorrow at 4 p.m. "You made an appointment without asking me." "I made an appointment to save our family. Unless you'd prefer to explain to a family court judge why our daughter is learning to mock people's appearances." The mention of family court made my blood run cold. "You're being dramatic. It was one incident." Miles pulled out a thick folder from his desk drawer. "Actually, it wasn't." He opened the folder, revealing printed screenshots of our group chat conversations, time-stamped and highlighted. My cruel comments about his appearance were marked in yellow, Jonah's flirtatious messages in pink. "How did you get these?" I demanded. "You screenshotted them yourself and saved them to our shared cloud drive." "I just printed them out." His voice was maddeningly calm. "Along with the metadata showing when each message was sent, who participated, and how many times you saved and shared these conversations." I stared at the papers in horror. Seeing my words printed out like this, they looked vicious, calculated, the kind of thing someone would collect for a very specific purpose. "Miles, you're taking this too seriously. It's just friends joking around." "Is this joking around?" He flipped to another page, showing a message thread where Jonah and I had made plans to meet for lunch, followed by increasingly intimate conversations. "That's not what it looks like." "Then I'm sure you won't mind explaining it to Dr. Martinez tomorrow. She'll be taking notes for our file." The way he said "our file" made it clear this wasn't about saving our marriage. This was about building a case. That night, I tried to reach out to Lena and Sarah, hoping they would help me explain that the messages were taken out of context. But when I called Lena, she seemed distant. "Aurelia, I think maybe we got a little carried away with those jokes. I mean, Miles is a good guy. He doesn't deserve to be humiliated like that." "You were laughing too," I protested. "I know, and I feel terrible about it. Look, if anyone asks, I'm going to say we were just being silly. But maybe you should apologize to Miles and try to work things out." Sarah was even less supportive. "I don't want to get involved in your marriage problems," she said when I tried to explain the situation. "Those messages, they look pretty bad, Aurelia. Maybe you should talk to a lawyer." "A lawyer?" The word hit me like a physical blow. How had harmless teasing escalated to the point where people were suggesting I needed legal representation? But as I lay in bed that night, listening to Miles type in his office until the early hours of the morning, I began to understand that this had never been about jokes at all. This had been about respect, dignity, and trust, things I had casually destroyed for the sake of a few laughs and some fleeting attention. The question now was whether it was too late to repair the damage I had done. Dr. Martinez's office was decorated in soothing blues and greys, with certificates lining the walls and a box of tissues strategically placed on the coffee table between two chairs. Miles and I sat as far apart as the seating arrangement allowed. "Thank you both for coming," Dr. Martinez said, settling into her chair with a legal pad. "Miles, you mentioned on the phone that there have been some concerning incidents involving your daughter and some communication issues between you and Aurelia. Can you walk me through what's been happening?" Miles opened his folder, the same one from the night before, now expanded with additional documents. "Doctor, I'd like to start by providing some context. Over the past several months, my wife has been participating in group conversations that mock my physical appearance. These conversations have been screenshotted, shared, and have now influenced our 7-year-old daughter's behavior at school." He handed Dr. Martinez copies of the chat logs, the school counselor's report, and what looked like a timeline of events with dates and times. "Aurelia," Dr. Martinez turned to me, "how would you characterize these interactions?" "They were just jokes," I said, hating how defensive I sounded. "Friends teasing each other. Miles is being overly sensitive about normal social banter." "I see," Dr. Martinez made a note. "Aurelia, when you say normal social banter, can you help me understand what you mean? Looking at these messages, there are several references to your husband's appearance being undesirable or unattractive. How do you think that might affect him?" I struggled to find the right words. "I didn't mean for him to see them. They were private conversations with friends." "But you did screenshot them and save them to a shared family cloud account," Miles interjected. "And you shared them with your mother and sister during family gatherings where Ivy was present." Dr. Martinez looked up from her notes. "Is that accurate, Aurelia?" The room felt like it was closing in on me. I may have mentioned some of the conversations, but I never intended for Ivy to overhear or repeat anything. "Yet she did repeat them," Dr. Martinez said gently. "At school, to other children." "Miles, how did you learn about the school incident?" Miles pulled out another document. "The school counselor, Ms. Grant, sent both Aurelia and me a summary of her conversation with Ivy. She documented that Ivy told another child they were ugly like Daddy, and that nobody wants to look at ugly people. When asked where she learned this language, Ivy said it was something the grown-ups said at home. And Aurelia, how did you respond when you learned about this incident?" "I was horrified," I said truthfully. "I never wanted Ivy to be affected by any of this. I tried to explain to her that it was wrong to say those things." "But you didn't stop participating in the group conversations," Miles said, pulling out more printed messages. "These are from after the school incident. The conversations continued, and in fact became more explicit." Dr. Martinez reviewed the new documents. I could see her expression growing more serious as she read. "Aurelia, I'm looking at messages here where you discuss meeting with someone named Jonah for private lunches, and there are several exchanges that appear to be romantic or sexual in nature. Can you help me understand the context?" My mouth went dry. "Jonah is a coworker. We were working on projects together." "Projects that required you to discuss how boring your marriage had become and how you deserved better?" Miles asked, his voice still maddeningly calm. "Miles, please," Dr. Martinez intervened. "Let's allow Aurelia to respond." But I had no good response. Seeing those conversations through the eyes of a professional, in the context of our daughter's behavioral problems and our marriage falling apart, they looked exactly like what they were: the foundation of an emotional affair built on the systematic humiliation of my husband. "I think I made some poor choices," I finally admitted, "but I never meant for things to go this far." Dr. Martinez made extensive notes. "I appreciate your honesty, Aurelia. Miles, what are you hoping to achieve through these sessions?" "I want to understand whether this marriage can be salvaged," he said. "But more importantly, I want to ensure that Ivy grows up in an environment where respect and kindness are valued, not where one parent is systematically mocked and devalued." "And if you determine the marriage can't be salvaged?" Miles was quiet for a long moment. "Then I want to ensure that any future arrangements prioritize Ivy's well-being and protect her from exposure to this kind of behavior." The clinical way he spoke about our marriage's potential end was more frightening than if he had yelled or cried. This wasn't emotional anymore. This was strategic. Aurelia, what are your goals for these sessions? I want to save my family, I said, and for the first time in months, I meant it completely. I want to make things right. Dr. Martinez nodded. That's a good starting point. However, I need to be clear about something. Given the documentation Miles has provided, and the fact that your daughter's behavior at school has been affected, I'm required to keep detailed notes of our sessions. These notes could potentially be subpoenaed if there are any legal proceedings regarding custody or family arrangements. Legal proceedings. Custody. The words hit me like physical blows. What does that mean exactly? I asked. It means that anything you say in these sessions could become part of a legal record if this situation escalates beyond therapeutic intervention. I looked at Miles, who was watching me with that same calculating expression I'd been seeing for weeks. Are you planning legal action? I asked him directly. I'm planning to protect my daughter, he replied, whatever that requires. After the session, we walked to our cars in silence. As I reached for my door handle, Miles spoke. Aurelia, I want you to know that I loved you. For 8 years, I loved you completely. I overlooked your need for attention, your casual cruelty when you thought it was funny, your willingness to humiliate me for social points. I told myself it was just your personality, that you didn't mean it. He paused, looking directly at me. But when you involved our daughter, when you taught her that it's acceptable to mock and devalue people, especially family members, that crossed a line I can't uncross. Miles, please. I can change. I can fix this. Can you? Because from where I'm standing, you're still more concerned about the consequences to you than the damage you've done to Ivy. Even in there, your first instinct was to minimize and justify. He got in his car and drove away, leaving me standing in the parking lot with the terrible realization that he was right. Even now, even facing the destruction of my family, my first thought wasn't about the pain I'd caused him or the lessons I'd taught our daughter. My first thought was about how to control the narrative and minimize the fallout to my reputation. And Miles, with his folders and timelines and documented evidence, had been counting on exactly that reaction. The next few days felt like walking through quicksand. Every conversation, every interaction, felt loaded with hidden meaning. Miles continued his routine of work, dinner, and bedtime stories for Ivy, but now I noticed things I'd missed before. He was documenting everything. When I snapped at Ivy for spilling juice on her homework, he quietly made a note on his phone. When I complained loudly about his mother's passive-aggressive text about Sunday dinner, he recorded it. When I had a phone conversation with Lena about how unfair Dr. Martinez had been, he was in the next room with his laptop open. Are you recording me? I confronted him after dinner one night. I'm protecting myself, he said simply. And Ivy. From what? I'm her mother. You're also the person who taught her that it's funny to mock people's appearance. You're the person who's been having an emotional affair while systematically humiliating her father. So yes, I'm documenting patterns of behavior that might be relevant to her well-being. The word affair hung in the air between us. I hadn't admitted to that, not explicitly. It's not an affair. Jonah and I are just friends. Miles pulled out his phone and started reading. Aurelia, yesterday at 2:47 p.m. I keep thinking about what you said at lunch. You're right. I deserve someone who sees how amazing I am. Jonah, 2:52 p.m. You're incredible, Aurelia. Miles doesn't know what he has. Aurelia, 2:55 p.m. Sometimes I wonder what would have happened if I'd met you first. My face burned. You're taking those out of context. Am I? Because there are about 40 more messages like that, including ones where you discuss meeting him at the Marriott downtown to talk privately. I had never actually met Jonah at a hotel, but I had suggested it. The fact that Miles knew about even that conversation meant he had access to everything. How are you getting my private messages? They're not private when you save them to our family cloud account and screenshot them to show your friends. Every message, every photo, every document you've saved is automatically backed up to our shared storage, including the photos you sent to Jonah. My stomach dropped. The photos weren't explicit, but they were definitely intended to be attractive. Flirtatious, the kind of photos a married woman shouldn't be sending to a coworker. Miles, I'm sorry. I know I made mistakes, but we can work through this. Can we? Because I tried to work through it. I tried talking to you after the restaurant incident. I tried giving you space to realize what you were doing. I tried suggesting we spend more time together as a family. Do you remember what you said? I didn't want to remember. You said I was being clingy and insecure. You said I needed to work on my issues instead of trying to control your friendships. You said I was lucky you put up with my social awkwardness at all. Each word was like a physical blow, because I did remember saying those things. I'd said them to justify continuing the conversations with Jonah, to avoid examining my own behavior. I was defensive. I didn't mean. You meant every word, and I have recordings of most of it. That night, I tried to reach out to my support network, hoping to find someone who would help me make sense of what was happening. But the responses were not what I expected. My mother, who had initially supported me, was now hesitant. Honey, I saw some of those messages you showed me. Looking back, they were pretty cruel. Maybe Miles has a point. Lena was even more direct. Aurelia, I can't be involved in this anymore. My husband saw some of those group chat messages and he's furious. He says if Miles decides to file for divorce, those conversations could be used as evidence of adultery or emotional abuse. I can't risk my own marriage to support behavior I'm not proud of. Sarah from work was the worst. HR wants to talk to you tomorrow. Apparently, Jonah reported that you've been making unwanted advances, and he's concerned about workplace harassment. He's claiming you've been stalking him and sending inappropriate messages. The betrayal was devastating. Jonah, who had encouraged every flirtatious message, who had suggested private meetings, and told me I deserved better, was now painting me as a predator. But when I looked at the messages objectively, I could see how they might be interpreted that way. I had been the one initiating most of the personal conversations. I had been the one suggesting we meet privately. I had been the one sending photos and making increasingly intimate comments. Miles had been right about something else too. My first instinct was still to control the narrative rather than take responsibility. I spent the evening crafting text messages to friends and family, trying to explain my side of the story, trying to get them to see that Miles was being manipulative and vindictive, but no one was responding the way I wanted them to. Instead, I was getting messages like, maybe you should focus on making things right with your family, and I think you need to take a step back and really look at your behavior. The most devastating response came from Miles's mother, Jocelyn, who had always been polite, but distant with me. She texted me directly. Aurelia, I've seen the messages you've been sending about Miles. I've also heard from Ivy's school about the language she's been using. I want you to know that I will support my son in whatever decisions he makes regarding his and Ivy's well-being. What you've done to him is unforgivable, but what you've taught my granddaughter is worse. You should be ashamed. The text was like a door slamming shut. Jocelyn had never spoken to me harshly before, but her message made it clear that I had lost not just my husband's family, but any chance of maintaining relationships with the people who mattered to Ivy. That night, as I lay in bed listening to Miles work in his office, I finally understood the scope of what I had destroyed. It wasn't just my marriage, it was my entire life. My friends, my family relationships, my professional reputation, my daughter's respect. And Miles, with his quiet documentation and methodical evidence collection, had simply allowed me to destroy it all myself. The most terrifying part was that I still didn't know what he was planning to do with all that evidence. But I was about to find out. The process server found me at the court-mandated parenting class I'd been required to attend after the school incident. I was sitting in a circle with other parents, listening to a counselor discuss appropriate communication in front of children, when a woman in a business suit approached me. "Aurelia Vane?" "Yes?" "You've been served." She handed me a thick manila envelope and walked away, leaving me holding legal documents in front of 20 other parents and 2 facilitators. My hands shook as I opened the envelope. Petition for legal separation and temporary custody orders. The words swam before my eyes. Miles wasn't just documenting anymore. He was taking action. I tried to read through the legal language, but certain phrases jumped out at me. Pattern of emotional abuse and humiliation. Adultery and inappropriate relationships. Detrimental impact on minor child. Supervised visitation pending psychological evaluation. Supervised visitation. He was trying to take Ivy away from me. The facilitator noticed my distress. "Mrs. Vane, is everything all right?" "I need to go," I whispered, shoving the papers back into the envelope. "We're required to complete the full session for your file." "My file?" The words came out as a shriek. "Everyone has a file on me now." I fled the building, calling Miles as soon as I reached my car. "You bastard! You had me served at a parenting class." "I had you served where I knew you'd be in a controlled environment with witnesses," he replied calmly. "I was concerned you might react poorly to receiving the papers." "React poorly? You're trying to steal my daughter." "I'm trying to protect my daughter. There's a difference." "Miles, please, we can work this out. We don't need lawyers and courts." "Aurelia, did you read the documents?" I pulled them out with shaking hands. "I'm trying to, but this legal language..." "Page 12, the exhibits." I flipped to page 12 and felt the blood drain from my face. Every screenshot, every message, every cruel comment was there. But more than that, there were things I'd forgotten about. Messages where I'd mocked Miles to my mother while Ivy was in the room. Audio recordings of me calling him pathetic and embarrassing during arguments. Photos of me and Jonah at lunch, sitting closer than coworkers should. "How did you get recordings of our private conversations?" "They weren't private. You were screaming loud enough for the neighbors to hear. I just made sure there was a record of what you actually said versus what you'd claim you said later." "You've been planning this for months." "I've been protecting myself and my daughter for months." "You've been planning this for months. I just documented it." The papers included a timeline that was devastating in its thoroughness. Every cruel comment, every flirtatious message, every incident where I'd prioritized my ego over my family's well-being was catalogued with dates, times, and supporting evidence. But the most damaging section was titled, "Impact on Minor Child." It included Ms. Grant's report from school, but also recordings of Ivy repeating insults she'd heard me say, photos of her drawings that showed a sad stick figure labeled Daddy, separated from 2 happy stick figures labeled Mommy and Friends, and a statement from her pediatrician about behavioral changes. "You took her to a doctor without telling me." "I took her for her regular checkup. When Dr. Peterson asked about any changes at home, I told her the truth. She recommended a child psychologist to help Ivy process the family dysfunction." "Family dysfunction? I'm her mother." "You're also the person who taught her that love looks like mockery and humiliation." Dr. Peterson was concerned enough to file her own report with Family Services. Family Services. The words hit me like a physical blow. "Miles, you're destroying our family." "Our family was destroyed the moment you decided that humiliating me was more important than respecting our marriage. I'm just making sure Ivy doesn't pay the price for your choices." I hung up and immediately called the only lawyer I knew, a friend of my mother's who handled real estate transactions. "Aurelia, I can't help you with this," he said after reviewing the documents. "This is complex family law, and frankly, the evidence against you is substantial. You need a specialist, and you need one fast." Miles has requested an emergency hearing for temporary custody, and it's scheduled for next week. Next week, I had less than 7 days to find a lawyer and figure out how to defend against months of carefully collected evidence. The lawyer I finally found, Patricia Chen, was blunt in her assessment. Mrs. Vane, I'll be honest with you. This is one of the most thoroughly documented cases I've seen. Your husband has evidence of emotional abuse, adultery, and behavior that's negatively impacted your child. The recordings, the messages, the school reports, it's all admissible, and it paints a very clear picture. But I never hit anyone. I never physically abused anyone. Emotional abuse is still abuse, and the fact that your daughter has started repeating your insults and showing behavioral problems at school suggests the court will take this very seriously. What can we do? We can argue that you were going through a difficult time, that you're willing to get counseling, that you've learned from your mistakes, but honestly, your best bet is to negotiate. Miles is asking for primary custody with supervised visitation for you until you complete anger management and parenting classes. If you fight this and lose, you could end up with even less access to your daughter. Supervised visitation, anger management classes, the complete destruction of my role as Ivy's mother. What if I refuse to agree? Then we go to court, and a judge reviews all of this evidence in a public hearing. The group chat messages, the recordings, the school reports, all of it becomes part of the public record. Your behavior gets scrutinized by strangers, and you risk losing even more than you're being offered now. That evening, I sat in my empty apartment. Miles had moved out with Ivy the day after serving me papers, and read through every page of the legal documents. The evidence was overwhelming, but what struck me most was how methodical it all was. Miles hadn't acted out of anger or hurt feelings. He'd acted like a man building a case, collecting evidence, and waiting for the right moment to present it all in the most damaging way possible. He'd turned my own words, my own choices, my own cruelty into a legal weapon that was now pointed directly at my heart. And the most terrifying part was that every piece of evidence was absolutely true. The emergency custody hearing was held in a sterile conference room rather than a traditional courtroom. Judge Patricia Williams presided over a table covered with evidence folders, legal briefs, and recording equipment. Miles sat across from me with his lawyer, calm and composed, while I fidgeted next to Patricia Chen. Your Honor, Miles's attorney began, we're here because Mr. Vane has serious concerns about his daughter's well-being in the current custody arrangement. The evidence we've submitted demonstrates a pattern of emotional abuse, adultery, and behavior that has directly harmed the minor child. Judge Williams reviewed the thick file in front of her. I've read your submissions, Mr. Harrison. Mrs. Chen, how does your client respond to these allegations? Patricia stood up. Your Honor, Mrs. Vane acknowledges that she made some poor choices during a difficult period in her marriage. However, she's committed to counseling and believes that supervised visitation is excessive given that there's no evidence of physical abuse or direct harm to the child. No direct harm? Judge Williams looked up from the file. I'm looking at a report from the child's school counselor indicating that 7-year-old Ivy told classmates they were ugly like Daddy and that nobody wants to look at ugly people. The counselor's notes indicate that when asked where she learned this language, the child said it was something the grown-ups say at home. My face burned with shame as the judge read Ms. Grant's report aloud. Furthermore, I see recordings of the child repeating similar insults during play, drawings that suggest family distress, and a pediatrician's report noting behavioral changes consistent with exposure to family conflict. Judge Williams turned to me directly. Mrs. Vane, can you explain how your daughter learned to use appearance-based insults against other children? I stood up shakily. Your Honor, I never intended for Ivy to overhear or repeat anything inappropriate. The conversations she heard were taken out of context. What context makes it appropriate for a child to hear adults mocking her father's appearance? I had no answer for that. Let me read you some excerpts from the group chat messages you saved and shared, the judge continued. These are your words, Mrs. Vane. Miles looks like he got his face caught in a blender. I just keep the lights off. He's stable and good with Ivy, but not exactly eye candy. You sent these messages, saved screenshots of them, and shared them with family members while your daughter was present. Is that correct? Yes, Your Honor, but... And during this same time period, you were engaging in inappropriate communications with a coworker named Jonah Laird, including discussions about meeting privately and expressions of romantic interest while married to Mr. Vane. The evidence was laid out so clinically, so thoroughly, that there was no way to minimize or recontextualize it. Your Honor, I made mistakes, but I love my daughter, and I've never done anything to hurt her directly. Mrs. Vane, you taught a 7-year-old child that it's acceptable to mock and humiliate family members based on their appearance. That child then used this learned behavior to hurt other children at school. How is that not direct harm? Judge Williams turned to Miles. Mr. Vane, what are you seeking in terms of custody arrangements? Miles stood up, and for the first time in months, he looked directly at me. Your Honor, I want my daughter to grow up understanding that love means respect, kindness, and loyalty. I want her to learn that families support each other, not tear each other down for entertainment. I'm requesting primary custody with supervised visitation for Mrs. Vane until she completes parenting classes, anger management counseling, and demonstrates a sustained pattern of appropriate behavior. And what does supervised visitation look like in practical terms? Visits in a neutral location with a court-appointed supervisor present. All communication between Mrs. Vane and myself regarding Ivy should go through a parenting app that maintains records. I'm also requesting a no disparagement clause that legally prohibits either parent from making negative comments about the other in front of Ivy or on social media. A no disparagement clause. He was legally silencing me from continuing the behavior that had destroyed our family. Judge Williams made notes as she spoke. Mrs. Chen, does your client agree to these terms? Patricia looked at me. We'd discussed this moment. I could fight the recommendations and risk losing even more, or I could accept the supervised visitation and work toward regaining unsupervised time with my daughter. Your Honor, Mrs. Vane agrees to the parenting classes and counseling requirements. However, we believe supervised visitation is excessive. Mrs. Chen, let me be clear about something. The evidence in this case shows a pattern of behavior that directly influenced a child's social and emotional development in harmful ways. Mrs. Vane's daughter is now using cruel language learned at home to hurt other children. That's not a minor parenting disagreement. That's a serious concern about the child's well-being. Judge Williams closed the file and looked directly at me. Mrs. Vane, I'm granting Mr. Vane's request for primary custody. You will have supervised visitation every other weekend and one evening per week, supervised by a court-appointed professional. You will complete a parenting education program, anger management counseling, and individual therapy before we reassess the custody arrangement. She paused, her expression stern. I'm also implementing the no disparagement clause. Any violation, any negative comments about Mr. Vane to your daughter on social media or to mutual acquaintances will result in immediate suspension of visitation rights. Do you understand? Yes, Your Honor. Mr. Vane, all communication between you and Mrs. Vane regarding your daughter will go through the Our Family Wizard app, which maintains records of all messages. This protects both parties and ensures appropriate communication. 2 years after the review hearing, I sat on the park bench, watching Ivy chase fireflies as dusk settled over the playground. She was 9 now, leggy, fearless, and quick with questions that still caught me off guard. Mum, why did you and Dad need a supervisor for so long? I took a slow breath, the way therapy had taught me. Because I wasn't being kind. I said mean things disguised as jokes, and it hurt people, especially you and Dad. The court made sure I learned how to be safe and respectful before I could have you alone. She nodded thoughtfully. Dad says you worked really hard. I did, and I'm still working. Ivy plopped down beside me, resting her head on my shoulder. I like when we do this now, just us. My chest ached with gratitude. Miles pulled up in the minivan at the agreed-upon time, windows down, no tension in his posture. He waved. I waved back. Homework done? He called. Almost, Ivy shouted, then turned to me. Can I stay an extra hour tomorrow? We're making cookies. I glanced at Miles. He gave a small nod, the silent approval that had replaced court orders. Sure, sweetheart. As Ivy ran to hug him goodbye, I stayed on the bench a moment longer, breathing in the cool evening air. The no disparagement clause still hung over every conversation, but it no longer felt like a gag. It felt like guardrails, reminders that words matter, that love isn't laughter at someone's expense. Miles had never wanted revenge. He'd wanted safety, for Ivy, for himself, even for me in the end. I stood, waved them off, and walked home alone, but not lonely. The woman who once thought cruelty was clever was gone. In her place was someone still imperfect, still learning, but finally worthy of the trust she'd once thrown away. The consequences had been brutal. The change had been harder. But watching my daughter laugh, without shadows in her eyes, made every supervised hour, every therapy session, every restrained word worth it. Real love, I'd finally learned, builds. It doesn't break for sport. And that lesson, carved deep, would stay with me forever.